The morning sun beat down mercilessly on Natalie Crawford's back as she dragged yet another armful of split logs toward her small cabin, her arms trembling under the weight, and her vision blurring with exhausted tears she refused to let fall. The Wyoming Territory stretched endlessly around her, beautiful and brutal in equal measure, and she had never felt more alone in all her 22 years than she did in that moment, 3 weeks after burying her father and realizing that the winter supplies he had been preparing would now fall entirely on her shoulders. She had already made 4 trips from the woodpile her father had split before the fever took him, and she needed at least 6 more loads to have enough firewood stacked against the cabin wall to last through the coming winter months. Her shoulders burned with each step, her calves ached from the uneven ground, and the rough bark bit into her forearms where her sleeves had rolled up. Still, Natalie pressed on, because stopping meant thinking, and thinking meant remembering that she was utterly alone on this homestead with no family, no husband, and precious few options. She was halfway to the cabin when her boot caught on a root she had stepped over a dozen times before. This time, exhaustion made her clumsy. Natalie stumbled forward and the logs scattered from her arms like oversized matchsticks, rolling in every direction across the dusty ground. She fell to her knees hard enough that she felt the impact jar through her bones, and finally, the tears she had been holding back broke free. Natalie knelt there in the dirt, surrounded by scattered firewood, and let herself cry for the first time since her father's death. She cried for him, for her mother who had passed 5 years earlier, for the future she had imagined that would never come to pass, and for the simple, overwhelming exhaustion that had become her constant companion. She did not hear the horse approaching until it was nearly upon her. "Miss, are you hurt?" The voice was deep and concerned, and it startled Natalie so badly that she scrambled to her feet, wiping frantically at her tear-stained face. She turned to see a man dismounting from a beautiful chestnut mare, his movements fluid and purposeful. He was tall, probably in his late 20s, with dark hair that needed cutting and brown eyes that held genuine worry. His clothing marked him as a rancher, the kind of man who spent his days working the land rather than gambling in saloons. There was something solid about him, something that spoke of reliability and strength. "I am fine," Natalie said, hearing how unconvincing her voice sounded even to her own ears. "I just stumbled. I will be fine." The man looked at her, then at the scattered logs, then at the cabin with its half-empty woodpile, and Natalie saw understanding dawn in his expression. He did not say anything about her tears or her obvious distress, which she appreciated more than he could know. Instead, he simply began gathering the fallen logs. "Let me help you with this," he said, his tone making it clear that he expected no argument. "You do not need to do that," Natalie protested, but her voice lacked conviction. "I can manage." "I am sure you can," the man replied, stacking the logs efficiently in his arms. "But there is no reason you should have to when I am standing right here." He started toward the cabin, and after a moment's hesitation, Natalie bent to gather what logs he had not taken and followed him. They walked in silence to the cabin, and the man set his armload down neatly against the wall where Natalie had been building her stack. When he turned back to her, she saw that he was studying her with an expression she could not quite read. It was not pity exactly, though there was sympathy there. It was more like assessment, as if he were taking her measure and trying to determine what she needed most. "I am Reed Norton," he said, extending his hand. "I have the ranch about 5 miles east of here, near Jefferson." Natalie shifted her own smaller bundle of logs and shook his hand briefly, feeling the calluses on his palm that matched her own. "Natalie Crawford, this was my father's homestead." "Was?" Reed asked gently. "He passed 3 weeks ago. The fever. Reed's expression softened with genuine sympathy. I am sorry for your loss. Are you here alone? Natalie lifted her chin, a gesture that had become almost automatic whenever anyone questioned her situation. I am perfectly capable of managing on my own. I do not doubt that, Reed said mildly, but capable and alone are two different things. He looked back at the main woodpile, then at her. How much more do you need to move? I can handle it myself, Natalie insisted. But even as she spoke, she felt her arms trembling from the exertion of the loads she had already carried. The thought of making 6 or 7 more trips made her want to sit down and weep again. But she would be damned if she would show that kind of weakness in front of a stranger. Reed seemed to read her thoughts on her face, because his expression gentled. Miss Crawford, I am going to say something, and I need you to hear it not as criticism but as simple truth. You are exhausted. You are grieving. And that woodpile needs to be moved before nightfall unless you want to risk animals getting into it or weather damaging it. I am here. I am capable, and I am offering to help. There is no shame in accepting help when it is freely given. Natalie wanted to argue. Every stubborn bone in her body wanted to insist that she could do it alone, that she did not need anyone, that she would be fine. But the truth was that she was bone-tired. Her arms felt like lead weights, and the thought of someone else shouldering even a portion of this burden was so tempting that it hurt. She looked at Norton's kind, honest face and made a decision that felt both like weakness and like the first sensible thing she had done in weeks. All right, she said quietly. Thank you. Reed smiled, and it transformed his whole face, making him look younger and more approachable. You are welcome. Now, why do not you rest for a moment while I bring up the heavy loads and you can direct me where you want everything stacked? I will help, Natalie said firmly, but I will take the lighter loads. Reed looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded. Fair enough. They worked in companionable silence for the next hour. Reed proved to be as strong as he looked, carrying loads that would have taken Natalie 2 trips in a single journey. He did not make a show of it or seem to expect praise. He simply worked with the quiet efficiency of a man accustomed to hard labor. Natalie found herself watching him when she thought he was not looking, noting the way his shoulders moved under his shirt, the concentration on his face as he stacked the wood neatly, and the gentleness with which he had handled her earlier distress. When the last log had been moved and stacked, Reed stepped back to survey their work with satisfaction. That should see you through winter nicely, he said. Do you have enough food stored up? Natalie hesitated, then nodded. My father put up vegetables before he got sick, and we have chickens. I will be fine. Reed looked at her thoughtfully. What about when things break? Do you know how to make repairs? I am learning, Natalie said, which was not quite a lie. She had learned a great deal in the past 3 weeks through trial and error, though there was still so much she did not know. Her father had always handled the heavier work, the complicated repairs, the tasks that required strength she simply did not possess. She was figuring it out as she went, but it was slow and frustrating, and she made mistakes that cost her time and precious supplies. I see, Reed said, and something in his tone made Natalie look at him sharply. He held up his hands in a gesture of peace. I am not questioning your ability, Miss Crawford. I am simply thinking that this territory is hard on everyone, and it is harder still when you are alone. If you need help with anything, my ranch is not far. You would be welcome to come by or to send word if something urgent comes up. Natalie felt something warm unfurl in her chest at his words, something that felt dangerously like hope. Why would you help me? You do not even know me. Reed was quiet for a moment, his gaze distant. When I first came to Wyoming, I was young and stupid and thought I could handle everything myself. I nearly lost my ranch in the first year because I was too proud to ask for help when I needed it. An older rancher named Tom Sullivan took pity on me and taught me that accepting help is not weakness. It is wisdom. He said that out here, we survive by looking out for each other, because the land is too harsh and life too unpredictable for pride to be worth more than practical sense. Reed focused on her again, his expression earnest. I am just trying to pass on what he taught me. Natalie felt her throat tighten with emotion. That is very kind of you. It is practical, Reed corrected gently, and it is neighborly, both of which matter more than pride. He moved toward his horse, then paused and turned back. Miss Crawford, I hope you will not take this as improper, but I want to say something. You strike me as a strong, capable woman. But even strong, capable people need help sometimes. There is no shame in that. And there is no shame in admitting that some burdens are too heavy to carry alone. Natalie felt tears prick her eyes again, but this time they were not tears of despair. They were tears of gratitude, of relief, of the simple human comfort of knowing that she was not as alone as she had felt an hour ago. Thank you, Mr. Norton, for the help and for the kindness. Raid, he said. Just raid. And you are very welcome, Miss Crawford. Natalie, she replied, feeling a small smile tug at her lips for the first time in weeks. If I am to call you Reed, you should call me Natalie. Reed smiled back, and Natalie felt something flutter in her chest that had nothing to do with exhaustion or grief, and everything to do with the warmth in his eyes. Natalie it is, then. He swung up onto his horse with easy grace. I meant what I said about coming by if you need anything. Even if it is just company, loneliness can be harder than physical labor sometimes. With that, he tipped his hat to her and rode away, leaving Natalie standing beside her neatly stacked firewood with a feeling she had not experienced in a very long time. It took her a moment to identify it, and when she did, it brought fresh tears to her eyes. It was hope. The next few days passed in the usual rhythm of work that had defined Natalie's life since her father's death. She fed the chickens, collected eggs, tended the small vegetable garden, and tried to keep up with the endless list of tasks that seemed to multiply faster than she could complete them. But something had shifted inside her since Reed Norton had stopped to help her with the firewood. She felt less alone, less overwhelmed, and more capable of facing each day. She thought about Reed often, more often than she probably should have. She remembered the kindness in his eyes, the strength in his hands as he had carried load after load of firewood, and the gentleness in his voice when he had spoken to her. She wondered if he thought about her at all, or if his act of kindness had simply been one good deed among many for a man who seemed to make neighborliness a habit. 6 days after their first meeting, Natalie was attempting to repair a broken hinge on the chicken coop door when she heard a horse approaching. Her heart gave an embarrassing leap before she had even confirmed who the rider was, and when she straightened and saw Reed Norton dismounting near her cabin, she had to resist the urge to smooth her hair and check her appearance. She was covered in dust and probably had chicken feathers in her hair, hardly the picture of femininity. "Good afternoon," Reed called, leading his horse toward her. "I hope I am not intruding." "Not at all," Natalie said, wiping her hands on her apron and trying not to look as pleased as she felt. "What brings you by?" Reed reached into his saddlebag and pulled out a cloth-wrapped bundle. "My housekeeper made too much bread yesterday, and I thought you might appreciate some. Also, I brought some dried beef and a jar of preserves. Mrs. Chen makes the best preserves in the territory." Natalie felt her throat tighten at his thoughtfulness. "You did not need to do that." "I know," Reed said simply, "but I wanted to." He handed her the bundle, and their fingers brushed briefly in the exchange. Natalie felt a spark of awareness at the contact, and from the way Reed's eyes widened slightly, she thought he might have felt it too. "Thank you," Natalie said softly. "This is very kind." Reed glanced at the chicken coop door hanging at an angle, having trouble with that hinge. Natalie grimaced. I cannot seem to get it to sit right. I think the wood around it might be rotting, but I am not sure how to fix that without replacing the whole door frame. May I take a look? Reed asked, already moving toward the coop. Natalie followed, watching as he examined the damaged wood with the focused attention of someone who knew what he was doing. After a moment, he nodded to himself. The wood is definitely rotted. You will need to replace this section of the frame, but not the whole thing. Do you have any spare lumber? There is some in the shed, Natalie said. My father kept supplies for repairs. Perfect. Do you have tools? A saw, hammer, nails, Natalie nodded. I will get them. They spent the next 2 hours working on the chicken coop door, with Reed doing most of the heavy work, but explaining each step to Natalie as he went. She appreciated that he did not simply take over and exclude her from the process. Instead, he treated her as a capable partner, teaching her what she needed to know to handle similar repairs in the future. It was respectful and practical, and it made her like him even more. As they worked, they talked. Reed told her about his ranch, which he had built from almost nothing over the past 8 years. He ran cattle primarily, with some horses, and he employed 3 ranch hands who lived in the bunkhouse on his property. Mrs. Chen was his housekeeper and cook, a Chinese immigrant who had come to Wyoming with her husband to work on the railroad. When her husband had died in an accident, Reed had hired her, and she had been with him for 4 years. She is practically family at this point, Reed said, carefully fitting the new piece of wood into place. She keeps me fed and makes sure the house does not fall apart around my ears. I do not know what I would do without her. Natalie found herself telling Reed about her own life, about how her parents had come to Wyoming when she was just a child, full of dreams about homesteading and building a life in the West. Her mother had died when Natalie was 17, taken by pneumonia during a harsh winter. Her father had never quite recovered from the loss, but he had done his best to maintain the homestead and prepare Natalie for a future he hoped would include a good husband and security. He did not want me to be alone, Natalie said quietly, watching Reed hammer a nail into place with practiced efficiency. He tried to encourage several of the young men in Jefferson to court me, but none of them seemed particularly interested, and I was not interested in them either. Father worried about what would happen to me when he was gone. Her voice caught slightly. He did not think it would be so soon. Reed paused in his work and looked at her with such understanding that Natalie felt her eyes sting with tears. He raised a strong daughter, Reed said gently. That is worth more than any husband he might have found for you. You will be all right, Natalie. You have what it takes to survive here. How can you be so sure? Natalie asked. You barely know me. I know that you were out here moving firewood by yourself, even though you were exhausted and grieving, Reed replied. I know that you did not give up or fall apart, even though you had every right to do both. I know that you are out here trying to fix a chicken coop door even though you are not sure how, because the work needs doing and you are the only one here to do it. He held her gaze steadily. Those things tell me everything I need to know about your character. Natalie felt heat rise in her cheeks that had nothing to do with the afternoon sun. You have a very generous view of me. I have an honest view of you, Reed corrected. He turned back to the door frame, testing the new wood to make sure it was secure. There, that should hold now. Let me attach the hinge and we will see how the door hangs. They finished the repair together, and when the door swung smoothly on its new hinge, Natalie felt a rush of accomplishment that was sweeter for having Reed there to share it. He smiled at her obvious pleasure, and Natalie thought again how his smile transformed his whole face, making him handsome in a rough, genuine way that had nothing to do with refined features and everything to do with character. "Thank you," Natalie said, "for the repair and for showing me how to do it. I will remember this the next time something needs fixing." "You are a quick study," Reed said. "I am sure you will manage just fine." He hesitated, then added, "Though I hope you will not hesitate to send for me if you need help with anything else. It is no trouble, and I would rather you ask than struggle alone." "I will," Natalie promised, and she meant it. Something had shifted between them during the afternoon, some wall of formality and distance that had crumbled under the weight of shared work and honest conversation. She felt comfortable with Reed in a way she had not expected, as if they had known each other much longer than a handful of days. Reed mounted his horse, but before he left, he looked down at her with an expression that made Natalie's heart beat faster. "Would you mind if I stopped by again in a few days, just to check on how you are managing?" "I would like that," Natalie said, and she could hear the warmth in her own voice. Reed's smile was like sunshine. "Good, I will see you soon then." As Natalie watched him ride away, she felt something bloom in her chest that she had not felt since before her father's illness. It was more than hope now. It was possibility, bright and unexpected, and it scared her as much as it thrilled her. Reed made good on his promise, visiting every few days with some excuse or another. Sometimes he brought food from Mrs. Chen. Sometimes he arrived with tools or supplies he claimed to have extra of, though Natalie suspected he had purchased them specifically for her. Often he found some task that needed doing and insisted on helping, though he always made sure to teach Natalie how to handle it herself, rather than simply doing it for her. Natalie looked forward to his visits with an intensity that both delighted and alarmed her. She found herself thinking about him constantly, wondering what he was doing on his ranch, whether he thought about her as much as she thought about him, and what it might mean that he kept finding reasons to ride 5 miles to see her. She told herself not to read too much into his kindness, that he was simply being a good neighbor as he had said. But there were moments, brief and electric, when their eyes met or their hands brushed, and Natalie felt something pass between them that went far beyond neighborliness. 3 weeks after their first meeting, Reed arrived with his 3 ranch hands and a wagon full of supplies. Natalie came out of the cabin to find them already unloading lumber and what looked like enough materials to build a small structure. "What is all this?" she asked, bewildered. Reed jumped down from the wagon with a slightly sheepish expression. "I hope you are not angry, but I have been worrying about your winter situation. That shed where you keep your tools is not going to hold up to heavy snow, and if it collapses, you will lose everything stored inside. I thought we could spend today reinforcing it and maybe building a small stable for a horse." "I do not have a horse," Natalie pointed out. "Not yet," Reed agreed. "But you should. It would make getting to town much easier, and if you ever needed to leave quickly, you would have transportation." He paused, reading her expression. "I should have asked before showing up like this. I am sorry if I overstepped." Natalie looked at the wagon full of supplies, at the 3 ranch hands who were politely pretending not to listen to their conversation, and at Reed's earnest, hopeful face. She should probably be offended at his presumption, at his assumption that she needed this kind of help. But the truth was that she did need it, that her shed was in terrible shape, and that the thought of having these problems solved by people who actually knew what they were doing was so appealing that she wanted to cry with relief. "You did not overstep," she said quietly. "This is incredibly generous, Reed. I do not know how to thank you." The tension left Reed's shoulders, and his smile was brilliant. "You just did. Now, I hope you do not mind, but I took the liberty of telling Mrs. Chen we would all be working here today, and she packed enough food for an army. I hope you will join us for lunch when we take a break." The ranch hands introduced themselves as Samuel Wright, Thomas Cahill, and James Porter, and they were friendly and respectful without being overly familiar. They worked with the kind of coordinated efficiency that spoke of long experience working together, and Reed clearly commanded their respect without being harsh or demanding. Natalie watched the way he interacted with his men, the way he worked alongside them rather than simply directing, and she found herself impressed by his leadership. Natalie insisted on helping despite Reed's protests, and she spent the morning hauling supplies and holding boards in place while the men nailed them down. It was hard work, but it was also satisfying, and there was something wonderful about being part of a team working toward a common goal. She had been alone for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to share labor with others. When they broke for lunch, Mrs. Chen's food proved to be as delicious as Reed had promised. There was fried chicken, fresh bread, roasted vegetables, and apple pie that was so good Natalie actually moaned aloud at the first bite, which made all the men laugh and Reed look at her with something heated in his eyes that made her blush. "You should come to dinner at the ranch sometime," Reed said casually, though his eyes were intent on her face. "Mrs. Chen would love to cook for someone who appreciates her food as much as you clearly do." "I would like that," Natalie said, and she saw pleasure flash across Reed's face. By the time the sun began to set, the shed had been completely reinforced, and a small but sturdy stable had been built beside it. The ranch hands packed up their tools, tipped their hats politely to Natalie, and headed back toward Reed's ranch with the wagon. Reed lingered behind, walking around the new structures with Natalie to inspect their handiwork. "This is amazing," Natalie said, running her hand along the smooth wood of the stable wall. "I cannot believe you did all this in one day." "4 people working together can accomplish a lot," Reed said. "And I meant what I said about the horse. I actually have a mare who would be perfect for you. She is gentle and well-trained, not flighty or nervous. I have been thinking about selling her because I do not really need her, but I would feel better about her going to someone I trust to treat her well." Natalie turned to look at him. "Reed, I cannot afford to buy a horse right now. I have some money saved, but I need to be careful about how I spend it." "I was not thinking of selling her to you," Reed said. "I was thinking of giving her to you, as a gift." "Absolutely not," Natalie said immediately. "That is too much. You have already done so much for me. I could not possibly accept something so valuable." Reed stepped closer to her, and Natalie found herself having to tilt her head back to maintain eye contact. This close, she could see the flecks of gold in his brown eyes and the faint scar on his chin that she had never noticed before. "Natalie, I want you to be safe. I want you to have options if something goes wrong. And frankly, I sleep better at night knowing that you have a way to get to town quickly if you need to, or to come to my ranch if there is an emergency." His voice softened. "Please, let me do this." Natalie knew she should refuse. Accepting a horse from Reed was accepting a gift of significant value, the kind of gift that implied things she was not sure either of them was ready to name. But she also knew that he was right, that having a horse would make her life safer and easier in countless ways. And more than that, she could see how important this was to Reed, how much he genuinely wanted to help her. "All right," she said finally. "But I insist on working off the cost somehow. I will not accept charity, Reed, no matter how well-intentioned." Reed looked like he wanted to argue, then nodded. "How about this? You come to dinner at my ranch once a week and keep Mrs. Chen company. She misses having another woman around and she would enjoy your company. Would that be acceptable?" Natalie knew that was not an even trade, not remotely, but she could see from Reed's expression that he was not going to budge on this. "Once a week," she agreed. And if there is anything I can do to help around your ranch, you will let me know." "Deal," Reed said, extending his hand. Natalie shook it, and neither of them let go immediately. They stood there in the gathering dusk, hands clasped, looking at each other with something building between them that felt inevitable and terrifying and wonderful all at once. "I should go," Reed said finally, but he did not move. "Yes," Natalie agreed, but she did not step back. Reed lifted his free hand slowly, giving her time to pull away, and gently brushed a strand of hair back from her face. His fingers lingered against her cheek, and Natalie felt her breath catch. "I really enjoy spending time with you," Reed said quietly. "I hope you know that." "I enjoy spending time with you too," Natalie whispered. For a moment, Natalie thought Reed might kiss her. She could see the desire in his eyes, could feel the way his hand trembled slightly against her cheek. But instead, he stepped back with visible reluctance and cleared his throat. "I will bring the mare by tomorrow if that works for you, and maybe we could arrange that dinner for this coming Sunday." "Sunday would be perfect," Natalie said, trying to hide her disappointment that he had not kissed her. But there was also something sweet about his restraint, something respectful that made her trust him even more. After Reed left, Natalie went into her cabin and sat down in her father's old chair, pressing her hands to her flushed cheeks. She was falling in love with Reed Norton. The realization should have frightened her more than it did. But instead, she felt giddy and young and full of hope for a future that suddenly seemed much brighter than it had just a month ago. Reed arrived the next morning leading a beautiful chestnut mare with a white blaze on her face and 3 white socks. The horse nickered softly when she saw Natalie, and when Natalie approached cautiously to stroke her nose, the mare leaned into her touch with obvious pleasure. "Her name is Rosie," Reed said, watching with satisfaction as Natalie and the horse became acquainted. "She is 8 years old, very calm, and she has good trail sense. She will take care of you." Natalie felt tears prick her eyes as she stroked Rosie's neck. "She is beautiful. Thank you, Reed. This means more to me than I can say." "You are welcome," Reed said warmly. He spent the next hour showing Natalie how to saddle and bridle Rosie, how to mount and dismount, and basic riding techniques. Natalie had ridden before, but not extensively, and Reed was patient and thorough in his instructions. By the time he was satisfied that she could handle the mare safely, Natalie felt confident enough to take Rosie for a short ride around the property. When she returned, Reed was leaning against the stable fence with an expression of such open admiration that it made Natalie's heart skip. "You are a natural," he said. "I knew Rosie was the right horse for you." They stood together in comfortable silence for a while, watching Rosie explore her new home. Finally, Reed turned to Natalie with a slightly nervous expression that she found endearing on a man usually so confident. "There is something I want to say," Reed began, then paused as if choosing his words carefully. "I know we have not known each other very long, but I feel like I should be honest about my intentions. I did not help you with the firewood that first day just to be neighborly, Natalie. I mean, I would have helped anyone who needed it, but the reason I keep coming back, the reason I think about you constantly and look for excuses to see you, is because I am drawn to you in a way I have not been drawn to anyone before." Natalie's breath caught in her throat. "Reed, I am not asking you for anything right now," Reed continued quickly. "I know you are still grieving your father, and I know you are trying to figure out how to manage on your own. I do not want to pressure you or make you uncomfortable, but I also do not want to be dishonest about why I am here. I am courting you, Natalie, or at least I am trying to. If that is not something you want, I need you to tell me now and I will step back. I will still help you when you need it because that is just being a decent human being, but I will not push for more than friendship if that is all you want." Natalie looked at this good, honest man who had appeared in her life when she needed help most, who had been nothing but kind and respectful and generous, and who was now standing before her with his heart in his eyes. She thought about how she felt when she saw him riding up to her cabin, the way her whole day brightened at his presence, and the way she had been hoping he would kiss her the night before. "I want you to court me," Natalie said clearly. "I have wanted that for a while now, but I was not sure if you felt the same way." The smile that broke across Reed's face was like dawn after a long night. "Really, really," Natalie confirmed, and then she was in his arms, though she was not sure which of them had moved first. Reed held her close, one hand cradling the back of her head while the other wrapped around her waist, and Natalie pressed her face against his chest and felt safer than she had felt in months. "I will do right by you," Reed murmured into her hair. "I promise, Natalie. I will take care of you." "I believe you," Natalie whispered back, and she did. The weeks that followed were the happiest Natalie had known since before her mother's death. Reed courted her properly, with respect for her reputation and genuine care for her well-being. He visited regularly but always during daylight hours, and never stayed longer than was appropriate for an unmarried man visiting an unmarried woman. He brought small gifts, helped with tasks around her homestead, and gradually introduced her to his life and the people in it. The weekly dinners at Reed's ranch became something Natalie looked forward to with almost embarrassing eagerness. Mrs. Chen was a revelation, a tiny woman with sharp eyes and a sharper wit, who had clearly decided that Natalie was good for her employer and therefore worthy of her approval. She cooked magnificent meals and told stories about her life in China and her journey to America that fascinated Natalie. The ranch hands were respectful and friendly, and Natalie enjoyed getting to know them as individuals rather than just as the men who had helped rebuild her shed. But the best part of those evenings was the time she spent with Reed, talking over dinner or walking around his property as he showed her the cattle and horses he was so proud of. They talked about everything: their childhoods, their dreams, their fears, and their hopes for the future. Reed told her about his difficult relationship with his father back in Missouri, a harsh man who had never understood Reed's desire to go west and build something of his own. Natalie told him about the loneliness of growing up as an only child in an isolated homestead, about watching her mother fade away and feeling helpless to stop it. "I was so angry," Natalie admitted one evening as they sat on Reed's porch watching the sunset paint the sky in shades of orange and pink. "I was angry at my mother for leaving, angry at my father for not being able to save her, and angry at God for taking her. I felt guilty about that anger for so long." Reed took her hand, lacing his fingers through hers. "Grief makes us feel all kinds of things that do not make sense. That does not make them wrong. It just makes them human." Natalie squeezed his hand gratefully. "My father never talked about it. He just got quieter and more withdrawn. I think that was almost harder than the initial loss, watching him fade a little more each day." "He loved her very much," Reed said gently. "He did," Natalie agreed. "And I understand that pain now in a way I did not then. But I wish he had held on, at least for my sake. I was not ready to lose him too." "I do not think we are ever ready to lose the people we love," Reed said. "But you are doing his memory proud, Natalie. You are surviving and building a life here, and that takes real courage." 2 months into their courtship, Reed took Natalie into Jefferson on a Saturday to attend a town social. It was the first time Natalie had been to town for anything other than essential supplies since her father's death, and it felt strange to be among people again, to hear music and laughter and the buzz of conversation. Jefferson was a small town, barely more than a main street with a few side roads, but it served the scattered ranches and homesteads in the area well enough. The social was being held in the church, which doubled as a community center for events like this. Tables had been set up with food contributed by various families, and a group of musicians was playing lively tunes in the corner. Natalie felt shy and out of place at first, too aware of her shabby dress and work-worn hands. But Reed stayed close to her side, introducing her to people with obvious pride, and his confidence in her gradually gave her confidence in herself. Several women approached to offer condolences about her father, and a few expressed surprise that she was still managing the homestead alone. Natalie could hear the unspoken question in their voices. How long before she gave up and left? She is doing wonderfully, Reed said firmly when one woman made a comment about how difficult homesteading must be for a woman alone. Her place is in excellent shape, and she has shown more strength and capability than most people twice her age. The woman looked between Reed and Natalie with knowing eyes and smiled. I am sure she has a good neighbor looking out for her. I am very fortunate in that regard, Natalie agreed, glancing at Reed with warmth in her eyes. As the evening wore on, Natalie found herself relaxing and actually enjoying herself. The food was good, the music was cheerful, and Reed never left her side except to fetch her punch or introduce her to someone new. When the dancing started, Reed bowed formally and asked if she would do him the honor, and Natalie accepted with a laugh. Reed was a good dancer, confident and steady, and Natalie felt like she was floating as he led her through the steps. Other couples swirled around them, but Natalie was barely aware of anyone except the man holding her. Reed's hand was warm on her waist, his eyes never leaving her face, and Natalie felt her heart swell with emotion so strong it almost frightened her. "What are you thinking?" Reed asked softly, pulling her slightly closer as the music slowed. "I am thinking that I am happier right now than I have been in a very long time," Natalie said honestly. "And that scares me a little." "Why does it scare you?" "Because I know what it feels like to lose people I love," Natalie admitted, "and the thought of losing you feels unbearable." Reed's expression grew serious, and he guided her toward the edge of the dance floor where they could talk with more privacy. "Natalie, I cannot promise that nothing bad will ever happen. Life is unpredictable, and living in the Wyoming Territory makes it even more so. But I can promise you that I am not going anywhere unless circumstances completely beyond my control take me. I am healthy, I am careful, and I have every intention of building a long life here." He paused, then added quietly, "And I hope that life includes you." "I hope so too," Natalie whispered. Reed smiled and leaned down to press a gentle kiss to her forehead, a gesture so sweet and tender that it made Natalie's eyes sting with tears. "Then, let us both stop being scared and just enjoy what we have right now." As fall deepened into early winter, Reed and Natalie's relationship deepened as well. They spent as much time together as propriety and practical necessity allowed, and the more Natalie learned about Reed, the more certain she became that he was the man she wanted to spend her life with. He was kind without being weak, strong without being harsh, and he treated her as an equal partner rather than a burden or a child to be protected. In early November, Reed asked Natalie formally if he could court her with the intention of proposing marriage. Natalie said yes without hesitation, and Reed produced a simple gold band that had belonged to his grandmother. "I want to do this properly," Reed said, holding the ring but not yet offering it. "I want to give you time to be sure, and I want to marry you with a clear conscience, knowing that you chose me because you want to, not because you feel obligated or because you need someone to take care of you." "I do not need someone to take care of me," Natalie said firmly. "But I want you in my life, Reed. I want to build a future with you, and I am sure of that." "Then I will ask you properly in a few weeks," Reed said. After you have had time to think about what marriage to me would really mean. I am not a rich man, Natalie. I have my ranch and I do well enough, but I work hard for everything I have. Life as my wife would not be easy. I am not afraid of hard work, Natalie replied, and I do not need wealth. I just need honesty, respect, and love. Can you give me those things? Every day for the rest of my life, Reed promised. 3 weeks later, on a cold December morning when the first snow had just begun to fall, Reed came to Natalie's cabin and got down on one knee in her doorway. He looked nervous and hopeful and so dear to her that Natalie felt her heart might burst. "Natalie Crawford," Reed began, his voice steady despite the emotion in his eyes. "You are the strongest, bravest, most remarkable woman I have ever known. You have survived loss and hardship with grace, and you have opened your heart to me even when you had every reason to guard it. I love you more than I knew it was possible to love someone, and I want to spend the rest of my life earning the gift of your love in return. Will you marry me?" "Yes," Natalie said, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, Reed, I will marry you." Reed slipped his grandmother's ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as if it had been waiting all these years to find its way to Natalie's hand. Then he stood and pulled her into his arms, and finally, he kissed her. It was gentle at first, almost tentative, and then it deepened into something that made Natalie's toes curl and her heart race. When they finally pulled apart, they were both breathless and smiling. "How soon can we get married?" Reed asked, pressing his forehead against hers. "As soon as you want," Natalie said. "I do not need a big wedding or a long engagement, I just need you." "Christmas," Reed said decisively. "I want to start the new year as your husband. Is that too soon?" "It is perfect," Natalie said, and kissed him again. They were married in the church in Jefferson on Christmas Eve, with Mrs. Chen and the ranch hands in attendance, along with several people from town who had become friendly with Natalie over the past few months. Natalie wore a simple blue dress that had been her mother's, and Reed wore his best suit. The ceremony was short and sweet, and when the pastor pronounced them husband and wife, Reed kissed Natalie with such joy that it made several of the women in attendance sigh with romantic happiness. The celebration afterward was held at Reed's ranch, which was now Natalie's home as well. Mrs. Chen had outdone herself with the food, and there was music and dancing and laughter that rang through the house and made it feel warm despite the cold outside. Natalie danced with her new husband, accepted congratulations from their guests, and felt like she might float away with happiness. When the guests finally left and they were alone in the house, Reed took Natalie's hand and led her upstairs to the bedroom that was now theirs. He was gentle and patient, and the intimacy they shared that night was everything Natalie had hoped it would be. Tender and passionate and full of love. Afterward, they lay tangled together in the bed, and Reed stroked Natalie's hair with gentle fingers. "I love you, Mrs. Norton," he murmured. "I love you too," Natalie whispered back. "Thank you for stopping to help me with that firewood. Thank you for seeing me when I felt invisible." Reed tilted her chin up so he could look into her eyes. "Thank you for letting me carry the load and for trusting me with your heart. You have made me happier than I ever thought possible." Natalie smiled and pressed a kiss to his jaw. "We are going to have a good life together." "The best life," Reed agreed and pulled her closer. The winter passed in a haze of happiness for Natalie. Living at Reed's ranch, which she now thought of as their ranch, was different from managing her father's small homestead, but she adapted quickly. The house was larger and more comfortable, and having Mrs. Chen there meant that Natalie was not solely responsible for all the domestic tasks. Instead, she found herself taking on new responsibilities, helping Reed with ranch bookkeeping, learning to ride better so she could help move cattle, and gradually becoming a partner in the business rather than just the rancher's wife. Reed valued her opinions and consulted her on decisions, which was more than many men in the territory did with their wives. He treated her as an equal, and that respect deepened Natalie's love for him every day. They worked together, ate together, and spent their evenings talking or reading or simply enjoying each other's company. The physical intimacy between them grew more comfortable and more passionate as they learned each other's bodies and preferences, and Natalie marveled at how natural it felt to share her life with Reed. In February, Natalie realized she was pregnant. She had suspected for a couple of weeks, but when she finally confirmed her condition, she felt a mixture of joy and terror so intense that she had to sit down. She wanted this baby, wanted Reed's child, but she remembered how her mother had struggled with the isolation and hardship of raising a child in the Wyoming Territory. What if she was not a good mother? What if something went wrong? When Reed came in that evening, he took one look at her face and immediately knelt beside her chair. "What is wrong? Are you all right?" "I am pregnant," Natalie blurted out, and then held her breath waiting for his reaction. Reed's face went through a series of expressions so quickly that Natalie could hardly track them: surprise, joy, fear, and then settling into something that looked like awed wonder. "Really? We are going to have a baby?" "Yes," Natalie said, and then she was crying, though she was not entirely sure if they were happy tears or frightened ones. Reed pulled her into his arms and held her tightly. "This is wonderful news, Natalie. We are going to be parents. Are you not scared?" Natalie asked, her voice muffled against his shoulder. "Terrified," Reed admitted, "but also happier than I can say. We are going to figure this out together just like we figure everything else out. And our child is going to be loved and protected and raised by two people who will do everything in their power to give them a good life." Natalie clung to him, drawing strength from his certainty. "I want this baby so much, but I am afraid of losing them. I am afraid of something going wrong." "I know," Reed said gently, "but we will get you the best care available, and we will be careful, and we will hope for the best. That is all we can do." He pulled back enough to look at her, his eyes shining with emotion. "We are going to be a family, Natalie. You, me, and our child." "That is worth any fear." Natalie nodded, feeling her panic begin to recede. Reed was right. They would face this together just as they faced everything else. "I love you," she said. "I love you too," Reed replied and pressed a kiss to her forehead. "Both of you." The pregnancy was not easy, but it was not unusually difficult either. Natalie experienced morning sickness that lasted well into her 4th month, and she was often tired. But Reed was attentive and supportive, taking over tasks when she was too exhausted, making sure she rested, and bringing her tea and toast when her stomach was upset. Mrs. Chen took Natalie under her wing, sharing wisdom about pregnancy and childbirth from her own experience and from the traditions of her homeland. As spring turned to summer, and Natalie's belly grew round with their child, Reed became almost comically protective. He did not want her riding horses, or lifting anything heavy, or doing any of the dozens of tasks she was perfectly capable of handling. Natalie found it endearing even when it was frustrating, because she knew it came from love and fear of losing her or the baby. "I am pregnant, not made of glass," Natalie said one afternoon when Reed had tried to prevent her from carrying a basket of vegetables from the garden. "I know," Reed said, taking the basket from her anyway. "But I would rather be too careful than not careful enough. Please, Natalie." "Let me take care of you." Natalie sighed but smiled. "All right, but you have to promise not to treat me like an invalid. I need to stay active or I will go mad with boredom." "I promise," Reed said and kissed her. just maybe active in ways that do not involve lifting heavy things or riding unpredictable horses. In September, just as the leaves were beginning to turn, and the air held the first hint of autumn chill, Natalie went into labor. Reed had made arrangements weeks earlier for the town midwife to stay at the ranch when Natalie's time came, and Mrs. Holbrook arrived calm and competent, taking charge of the situation with practiced ease. Reed was beside himself with worry, pacing outside the bedroom and driving the ranch hands crazy with his nervous energy. Samuel finally told him bluntly to go chop wood or something useful, because his fretting was making everyone else anxious too. The labor lasted 14 hours, which Mrs. Holbrook assured Reed was perfectly normal for a first baby, though Reed looked like he might have a heart attack at any moment. When Natalie's cries of pain reached him, he tried to force his way into the room, only to be blocked by Mrs. Chen, who told him firmly that he would be more hindrance than help and to trust the midwife to take care of his wife. Finally, as the sun was setting on a beautiful autumn evening, a baby's cry rang out through the house, strong and healthy and furious. Mrs. Holbrook opened the bedroom door and smiled at Reed's terrified face. "You have a son, Mr. Norton, and your wife is tired but well." Reed nearly knocked the midwife over in his rush to get into the room. Natalie was propped up in bed, her hair plastered to her forehead with sweat, and her face exhausted but radiant. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in soft cloth, and when Reed approached, she pulled the fabric back to reveal a red, wrinkled face with a shock of dark hair. "Meet your son," Natalie said softly, her voice hoarse from hours of labor. Reed sank onto the edge of the bed, staring at the baby with an expression of such awe that it made Natalie's eyes fill with tears. "He is perfect," Reed whispered. "Natalie, you are amazing. He is perfect." "Would you like to hold him?" Natalie asked. Reed looked terrified at the prospect but nodded, and Natalie carefully transferred their son into his arms. Reed held the baby with exquisite gentleness, as if he might break, and Natalie watched as her strong, capable husband was completely undone by the weight of his newborn son. "What should we name him?" Reed asked without looking away from the baby's face. Natalie had been thinking about this for months. "I would like to name him Robert after my father, Robert Thomas Norton after both our fathers." Reed looked up at her with tears in his eyes. "Robert Thomas Norton, it is perfect. Your father would be proud, Natalie. So proud of you, of what you have built here, of the woman you have become." "I hope so," Natalie said softly. "I think he would have liked you very much." "I wish I could have met him," Reed said, "to thank him for raising such an incredible daughter." They sat together, the three of them, as the light faded outside and the first stars began to appear. Their son, Robert, slept peacefully in his father's arms, unaware of how loved he already was, of how much hope and joy he represented to his parents. The years that followed were full and rich, marked by the kind of happiness that comes from shared purpose and genuine love. Robert grew from a tiny infant into a curious, active toddler, and Reed proved to be a devoted father, patient and playful with his son. Natalie watched her husband teach their child to walk, to ride, to help around the ranch, and she fell more in love with him every day. When Robert was 3, Natalie became pregnant again. This time, the pregnancy felt easier, perhaps because she knew what to expect or perhaps because she was not dealing with grief and adjustment to a new life. When their second son, Henry James Norton, was born, Robert was fascinated by his baby brother and insisted on helping with everything. The ranch prospered under Reed and Natalie's joint management. Reed's instinct for cattle and horses combined with Natalie's talent for bookkeeping and organization made them a formidable team. They gradually expanded their herd, added more land, and built a reputation for fair dealing and quality livestock. The ranch hands who worked for them were loyal and hardworking, treated well and paid fairly. Mrs. Chen became part of their family in every way that mattered, a beloved presence in their home and a doting grandmother figure to the boys. She taught Natalie more of her language and customs, and Natalie taught her better English in return, though Mrs. Chen's English had always been quite good. They spent many afternoons together in the kitchen, talking and cooking and watching the boys play. Natalie's old homestead, the place where she had struggled with firewood and felt so desperately alone, they kept as grazing land and a reminder of where they had come from. Sometimes, Reed and Natalie would ride out there together, and Natalie would remember that terrible morning when she had fallen in the dirt, surrounded by scattered logs and feeling like her world had ended. "I was so lost that day," Natalie said one afternoon as they sat on their horses looking at the small cabin. "I had no idea how I was going to survive, let alone build any kind of life. And then I came along and made a nuisance of myself," Reed said with a grin. Natalie laughed and reached over to take his hand. "You saved me, Reed. You carried my load when it was too heavy for me to bear alone, and you lightened my heart when I thought I would never be happy again." "You saved me too," Reed said seriously. "I had a good life before I met you, but it was lonely. You made my house a home, Natalie. You gave me a family and a purpose beyond just surviving and working. You made me happier than I ever imagined I could be." They rode back to the ranch hand in hand, their hearts full of gratitude for the path that had brought them together. As the boys grew older, they became involved in the ranch work, learning the skills they would need to eventually run the operation themselves if they chose. Robert, now 10, was showing a real talent with horses, able to calm even the most skittish animals. Henry, at 7, was more interested in the business side, always asking questions about why they made certain decisions and how they determined prices. Reed and Natalie talked sometimes about having more children, but they were content with their 2 boys. Their family felt complete, and as they entered their late 30s, they were more focused on building security and stability for the children they had than expanding their family further. The territory around them was changing too. Wyoming was growing, becoming more settled, and talk of statehood was in the air. Jefferson had grown from a small outpost to a proper town with a school, a doctor, and even a small newspaper. The wild, dangerous frontier that Natalie had known as a child was becoming more civilized, and while there was something bittersweet about the passing of that era, Natalie was grateful that her sons would grow up in a place that was safer and more stable than the one she had known. On their 15th wedding anniversary, Reed took Natalie back to the church in Jefferson where they had been married. They renewed their vows in a private ceremony with just Mrs. Chen and the boys in attendance, and afterward they celebrated with a meal at the hotel restaurant that had opened just the year before. 15 years, Reed said, raising his glass in a toast. 15 years of marriage, 2 beautiful sons, and a life beyond anything I dreamed of when I first saw you struggling with that firewood. Best decision I ever made was accepting your help that day, Natalie said, clinking her glass against his. You changed my whole life, Reed. We changed each other's lives, Reed corrected gently. That is how the best marriages work. 2 people making each other better, stronger, happier. That night, lying in bed in their hotel room while the boys slept in the adjoining room, Reed pulled Natalie close and kissed her with the passion and tenderness that had only deepened over their years together. I love you more now than I did the day we married, Reed murmured against her hair. I did not think that was possible, but every year I love you more. I love you too, Natalie whispered back. Thank you for seeing me when I was at my lowest. Thank you for not walking away when you could have. Thank you for building this life with me. Thank you for letting me, Reid replied and kissed her again. Years continued to pass, marked by the small and large moments that make up a life. Birthdays and holidays, illnesses and recoveries, successes and setbacks. Robert grew into a young man with his father's steady temperament and his mother's determination. Henry was more impulsive but equally hardworking, always looking for ways to improve and expand the ranch. When Robert was 18, he fell in love with the daughter of a neighboring rancher, a sweet girl named Catherine Miller who had Reid and Natalie's immediate approval. The wedding was held at the ranch, and as Natalie watched her eldest son pledge his life to the young woman he loved, she thought about how far they had all come from that day when Reid had first stopped to help her with firewood. "Our son is married," Reid said wonderingly, his arm around Natalie's waist as they watched Robert and Catherine dance. "When did he grow up?" "Gradually, then suddenly," Natalie said with a smile. "One day he was learning to walk, and the next he is promising to love and cherish a wife of his own." "It goes too fast," Reid said, his voice thick with emotion. "It does," Natalie agreed, "but what a beautiful journey it has been." When Henry turned 20, he announced that he wanted to try his hand at breeding horses specifically, focusing on creating a line known for intelligence and temperament as well as strength. Reid and Natalie supported his dream, helping him set up his own operation on a section of their land. Henry threw himself into the work with characteristic intensity, and within a few years, he had established a reputation for quality horses that brought buyers from across the territory. Robert and Catherine gave Reid and Natalie their first grandchild, a daughter they named Natalie Rose, and holding that tiny baby in her arms, Natalie felt the circle of life complete itself in a way that was both humbling and joyful. She was a grandmother now, watching her son experience the same fears and joys she had felt when Robert was born. "She is beautiful," Reid said, looking at his granddaughter with the same awestruck expression he had worn when Robert was born. "And she looks just like you." "Poor child," Natalie joked, but she was pleased. As they entered their 50s, Reid and Natalie gradually stepped back from the day-to-day management of the ranch, turning more responsibility over to Robert and Henry. They had built something substantial and lasting, a legacy that would continue long after they were gone. But they were not ready to retire completely. They still had good years ahead of them, and they intended to enjoy every moment. They traveled a little, taking trips to places they had always wanted to see. They visited Denver and marveled at how much it had grown. They went to San Francisco and saw the ocean for the first time, holding hands on the beach and feeling like children again. But they always came home to Wyoming, to the ranch and the family and the life they had built together. On their 25th anniversary, their entire family gathered at the ranch for a celebration. Robert and Catherine were there with their 3 children. Natalie Rose, now 6, and twin boys, Thomas and James, who were 4. Henry had recently married a schoolteacher named Elizabeth, and though they did not have children yet, Elizabeth was clearly already a beloved member of the family. Mrs. Chen, now quite elderly but still sharp as a tack, presided over the festivities with the authority of the family matriarch she had become. The ranch hands, including Samuel, who had been with them from the beginning, joined the celebration. There was food and music and laughter that echoed across the land Reid and Natalie had worked so hard to build into something prosperous and secure. As the sun set and the children played in the yard, Reid pulled Natalie aside and led her to the spot where they had first kissed, all those years ago. The trees had grown taller, the ranch had expanded, but the feeling between them was the same as it had always been. Deep love, genuine respect, and profound gratitude. 25 years, Reed said, holding both of Natalie's hands in his. A quarter of a century of loving you, and it still does not feel like enough time. We have been blessed, Natalie said, her eyes shining with tears of joy. So incredibly blessed, Reed. When I think about that scared, grieving girl struggling with firewood, I can hardly believe this is the same life. You were never just a scared girl, Reed said firmly. You were always strong and capable and remarkable. I just helped you see it. You did more than that, Natalie insisted. You gave me hope when I had none. You gave me love when I felt unlovable. You gave me a family and a future and a reason to keep going when I was ready to give up. She paused, then added softly, You carried the load when it was too heavy for me, Reed. And you have never stopped carrying it, even when I was strong enough to share the weight. That is what love is, Reed said simply. Carrying each other's loads, being strong when the other person is weak, and knowing that they will do the same for you when you need it. He cupped her face gently in his hands. I have needed you just as much as you have needed me, Natalie. Never doubt that. They kissed as the sun painted the sky in shades of gold and crimson, and from the house behind them came the sounds of their family. Children laughing, adults talking, the clink of glasses and the warmth of people who loved each other gathered together. It was everything they had worked for, everything they had dreamed of during those early days when they were just beginning to fall in love. As they walked back to join their family, Reed took Natalie's hand, and she felt the familiar calluses on his palm, the strength in his fingers, and the certainty of his grip. After 25 years, his hand still felt like home. The years continued their steady march, bringing both joys and sorrows as all lives do. Mrs. Chen passed away peacefully in her sleep at the age of 78, and Reed and Natalie mourned her as they would have mourned a mother. They buried her in the family plot they had established on the ranch, and every year on the anniversary of her death, they placed fresh flowers on her grave and told stories about her to the grandchildren who had known and loved her. Robert's family continued to grow, with Catherine giving birth to 2 more daughters, while Henry and Elizabeth had twin boys of their own. The ranch house, which had once seemed so spacious, was now frequently filled to bursting with grandchildren running through the halls and playing in the yard. Reed and Natalie loved every chaotic, noisy moment of it. In their early 60s, Reed began to slow down a bit, bothered by arthritis in his hands and knees that came from decades of hard physical labor. Natalie, too, felt the effects of age, her hair now completely gray and her movements not quite as quick as they once were. But they were healthy overall, and they were still deeply in love, still finding joy in each other's company after more than 3 decades of marriage. They had achieved something that many couples never do. They had built not just a successful business and a large family, but a partnership based on mutual respect, genuine affection, and unwavering support. They knew each other's moods and habits, could communicate with just a glance, and still looked forward to their evenings together after the work was done. On quiet nights, they would sit on their porch and watch the sunset, just as they had done countless times before. Reed would hold Natalie's hand, and they would talk about the day, about the grandchildren, about plans for the future. Or sometimes they would sit in comfortable silence, content just to be together. You ever think about that day I saw you with the firewood? Reed asked one evening when they were both in their late 60s, their faces lined with age but their eyes still bright with life. Sometimes, Natalie admitted. I think about how close I came to giving up, to just selling the homestead and going back east to live with distant relatives who did not want me. If you had not stopped that day, if you had just ridden past, my whole life would have been different. I think about that too, Reed said quietly. I almost did ride past. I was actually heading to town for supplies and I was running late. But something made me stop. Call it fate or God or just instinct, but I am grateful every day that I listened to it. You think we were meant to find each other? Natalie asked, a question she had wondered about many times over the years. Reed considered this carefully before answering. I think we were two people who both needed what the other could offer. Whether that was destiny or just fortunate timing, I do not know. But I do know that we made the choice to build something together, and that choice is what created this life we have. Fate might have brought us together, but love kept us together. Natalie squeezed his hand, feeling the familiar contours of his palm against hers. I would choose you again, she said softly. If I had to live my life over and could choose differently, I would still choose you, Reed, every single time. And I would choose you, Reed replied, his voice rough with emotion. You are the best choice I ever made, Natalie Norton. As Wyoming achieved statehood in the summer of their marriage's 33rd year, the entire territory, now officially a state, celebrated. Reed and Natalie joined in the festivities in Jefferson, watching the parade with their grandchildren and marveling at how much the place had changed since they had first arrived as young people full of hope and fear. We helped build this, Reed said, gesturing at the thriving town around them. Not just us, of course, but our generation. We turned wilderness into civilization. I am not sure civilization is always an improvement, Natalie said with a smile, but I suppose progress is inevitable. You miss the old days? Reed asked curiously, when things were simpler and wilder. Natalie thought about this. Sometimes I miss how clear everything was back then. You worked hard, you survived, and that was enough. Now there are so many more complications, so many more choices. She paused, then added, but I do not miss the fear and the uncertainty. And I certainly do not miss being alone. No, I would not go back, even if I could. This life, complicated as it is exactly where I want to be. In their 70s, Reed and Natalie were content to be fully retired, leaving the ranch entirely in the capable hands of Robert and Henry. They had a small house on the property that Robert had built for them, cozy and comfortable and perfect for two people who no longer needed much space. They spent their days reading, gardening, and enjoying their grandchildren, who now numbered 10 in total. Great-grandchildren began to arrive, tiny new lives that represented the future extending beyond anything Reed and Natalie would live to see. But knowing that their legacy would continue, that the love they had built would ripple out through generations, gave them both a deep sense of peace and satisfaction. We did well, Reed said one evening as they watched their youngest great-grandson, named Reed in his honor, toddle around the yard under his mother's watchful eye. We built something that will last long after we are gone. We did, Natalie agreed, leaning against his shoulder. And it all started with a simple act of kindness. You saw someone who needed help and you stopped. That choice changed everything. Best decision I ever made, Reed said, kissing the top of her head. On their 40th wedding anniversary, the entire family gathered once again for a celebration. It was a smaller, quieter affair than their 25th had been, as befitted their age and energy levels. But it was no less joyful. Their children, grandchildren, and great-grandchildren filled the main ranch house, and the love in that room was palpable. Robert stood up to give a toast, his own hair now streaked with gray, his face weathered by years of outdoor work. To my parents, he said, raising his glass. You taught us what love looks like when it is tested by hardship and strengthened by time. You showed us that partnership means sharing both burdens and joys, and you built a family and a legacy that we are all proud to be part of. Thank you for everything you have given us. Happy anniversary. Everyone raised their glasses, and Reed and Natalie, sitting together with their hands intertwined, felt overwhelmed by gratitude and love. This was what they had built, not just a ranch or a business, but a family bound together by love and respect and shared history. That night, alone in their small house, Reed helped Natalie prepare for bed, a routine they had perfected over decades of marriage. They moved slowly now, their bodies no longer as cooperative as they once were, but they moved together with the ease of long practice. "I am tired," Natalie admitted as she settled into bed beside Reed, "but it is a good tired, a satisfied tired." "I know what you mean," Reed said, pulling her close. Even after 40 years, they still slept curled together, finding comfort in each other's warmth. "Reed," Natalie said softly into the darkness. "Yes, love. Thank you for stopping that day. Thank you for seeing me when I was at my lowest and choosing to help rather than pass by. Thank you for loving me and building this life with me. I have been so happy." Reed's arms tightened around her. "Thank you for letting me help. Thank you for trusting me with your heart. Thank you for making me happier than I ever dreamed possible. I have loved you from that first day, Natalie, and I will love you beyond my last breath." "And I will love you beyond mine," Natalie whispered. They fell asleep in each other's arms as they had done thousands of times before, secure in the knowledge that whatever time they had left would be spent together, loving each other with the same devotion they had shown for 4 decades. In their early 80s, both Reed and Natalie's health began to decline in earnest. They had lived good, long lives, but time was catching up with them. Reed's arthritis had progressed to the point where movement was often painful, and Natalie had developed a heart condition that left her easily tired. Their children wanted them to move into the main house where they could be more easily cared for, but Reed and Natalie stubbornly insisted on maintaining their independence as long as possible. "We have our dignity," Reed said firmly to Robert when he suggested, again, that they give up their house. "We will ask for help when we need it, but we are not invalids yet." Robert sighed but did not argue. He understood his father's pride and he respected it, even as he worried constantly about his parents. Despite their declining health, Reed and Natalie still had good days, days when they felt almost like their younger selves. On those days, they would sit on their porch and watch the ranch they had built continue to thrive under new management. They would tell stories to their great-grandchildren, passing down family history and the values they held dear. They would hold hands and marvel at the sheer improbability of their long, happy life together. On a clear spring morning, when Reed was 83 and Natalie was 80, they were sitting on their porch as usual, watching the sunrise paint the sky in shades of pink and gold. The air was fresh and clean, and birds sang in the trees around their house. "It is a beautiful morning," Natalie said softly, her hand in Reed's as it had been for so many mornings before. "It is," Reed agreed. He was quiet for a moment, then said, "Natalie, if something happens to me if I go first, I need you to promise me something." "Do not talk like that," Natalie protested, but her voice was weak. They both knew that their time was growing short. "Please," Reed insisted gently. "I need to say this. If I go first, I need you to promise me that you will not give up. That you will keep living and enjoying whatever time you have left. I need to know that you will be all right." Natalie was quiet for a long moment, tears streaming down her weathered cheeks. "Only if you promise me the same thing. If I go first, you have to keep going, Reed. For our family, for our grandchildren and great-grandchildren, promise me." "I promise," Reed said, lifting her hand to his lips and kissing it gently. "But I hope we go together. I hope we get to walk into whatever comes next side by side, just as we have walked through life." "That would be nice," Natalie agreed wistfully. "But life rarely works out that neatly. As it happened, life did work out neatly in the end. On a warm summer evening 2 months after that conversation, Reed and Natalie went to bed as usual, comfortable and content. They talked quietly about the day, about the great-grandchild who had visited and made them laugh, about the beauty of the sunset they had watched together. They told each other, "I love you" one last time, and they fell asleep in each other's arms. They did not wake up. Robert found them the next morning when he came by with breakfast as he did every day. They were lying peacefully in their bed, hands still clasped together, expressions serene. The doctor later said that Reed's heart had likely given out first, probably in his sleep, and that Natalie's weak heart had simply stopped within minutes, as if she had known that he was gone and had chosen to follow him. The entire community mourned the loss of Reed and Natalie Norton, pioneers who had helped build Wyoming from wild territory into a thriving state. But more than their business success or their contributions to the community, people remembered their love story, the rancher who had stopped to help a struggling young woman with firewood and ended up building a life with her that spanned more than 6 decades. They were buried together in the family plot on the ranch, under a simple stone that bore both their names and the dates of their long lives. But their true monument was not made of stone. It was the family they had created, the ranch they had built, the community they had helped establish, and the example they had set of what love could be when it was based on respect, partnership, and unwavering commitment. Robert stood at their graves after the funeral, his own eyes red from crying, and thought about everything his parents had taught him. They had shown him that strength was not just about physical power, but about emotional resilience. That partnership meant sharing both triumphs and burdens. That love was not just a feeling, but a choice you made every day, over and over, to put another person's well-being alongside your own. "Thank you," Robert whispered to the fresh earth covering his parents' graves. "Thank you for showing us how to love. Thank you for building this family. Thank you for everything." The ranch continued to prosper under Robert and Henry's management, and then under their children's management, and their children's children after that. The Norton name became synonymous with quality livestock and fair dealing, and that reputation lasted for generations. But within the family, what lasted even longer was the story of how it all began, with a rancher who saw a young woman struggling with firewood and made the simple, kind choice to help her. That choice, made in a moment of compassion on a hot morning in Wyoming Territory in the year 1877, rippled out through time, affecting not just Reed and Natalie, but everyone who came after them. It was a testament to the power of kindness, the importance of choosing to help rather than pass by, and the miraculous things that can happen when two people commit to carrying each other's loads and lightening each other's hearts. Years after Reed and Natalie had passed, their great-great-grandchildren would sit in the same house Reed had built, now expanded and modernized but still essentially the same, and they would hear the story of how their ancestors fell in love. They would learn about the young widow struggling with firewood, about the rancher who stopped to help, and about the partnership that grew from that simple act of kindness into a love that lasted a lifetime and built a legacy that endured for generations. And they would understand, perhaps better than people who had not been shaped by Reed and Natalie's example, that the greatest things in life often begin with the smallest acts of compassion. That seeing someone who needs help and choosing to stop, to offer assistance without expecting anything in return, can change not just one life but countless lives, stretching into a future you will never see. Reed Norton saw Natalie Crawford struggling with firewood on that fateful morning, and he made the choice to help. In doing so, he carried her load and lightened her heart. But she did the same for him, giving him the family and love he had been longing for without even knowing it. Together, they built something beautiful and lasting, a love story for the ages, set against the harsh but magnificent backdrop of the American West. Their story became legend in their family, passed down with pride from one generation to the next. It was a reminder that love could be found in the most unexpected places, that acts of kindness could change the course of lives, and that the strongest partnerships were built on mutual respect, genuine affection, and the willingness to carry each other's burdens when the load became too heavy to bear alone. The ranch still stood, over a century after Reed first built it, a testament to the vision and hard work of its founders. The land still produced cattle and horses. The house still sheltered family, and the legacy of love that Reed and Natalie had created still influenced every generation that came after them. And somewhere, in whatever place souls go when this life is done, Reed and Natalie Norton were together still, hands clasped as they had been for more than 60 years, their love transcending even death itself. They had lived fully, loved deeply, and built a legacy that would endure long after they were gone. In the end, that was all anyone could hope for: a life well lived, a love well cherished, and a legacy that made the world a little bit better for having been in it. The end.